electronics and white goods. These are all sectors that aren't particularly technologically advanced. They've always relied on multiple price points for labor for distributed supply chains, and none of them work in this environment. So Americans are discovering that if they want a washing machine, they might have to build it themselves. If they want textiles, they might have to weave them themselves. And the technology has advanced to the point that in most of these sectors, if not all of them, once you've paid for the industrial plant, operating it is actually cheaper in North America than it is in East or South Asia. And so we're going to see this huge scale, just pickup of industries, relocation into North America in shorter, simpler supply chains that are closer to the end consumer. And what gets left behind, it really depends upon where you are. If you're in Thailand or Malaysia, the semiconductor supply chain system is a lot stickier. Usually the crystals are grown, sliced, cut, doped, cooked, and built into chips all in the same facility. You don't just pick that up and move it. But textiles, you can have a facility that's 1 acre in North Carolina with a staff of 2 that is cheaper to operate than a facility in India with a staff of 2,000 people at looms. That's not going to come back. For it to come back, the global security situation would have to not change. And if the Americans are going home, they have no reason to have a supply chain system in South and Southeast Asia. So you will still have some of this for Indians who want to supply themselves. But the idea that call centers and textiles can be kind of that first step towards towards a deeper development experience, moving up the value-added chain, building an infrastructure, expanding infrastructure, that model's over. The rules of how we've operated for the last 70 years are changing right now. And countries like India are going to have to find a completely new model to take advantage of it or pioneer their own to move forward. And if you look at the last 1,500 years of Indian history, there's not a particularly robust historical analog that they can draw from here. Stagnation is by far the most likely outcome. And especially if you keep that 1% at the top that's still value added, the degree of inequality you're going to see in India is going to be huge, and that will absolutely have political connotations. Yeah, the sort of jobs that are coming back from South and Southeast and East Asia to the United States are not going to look the same here. They're going to be far more technologically driven, but maybe not as much as you think. Remember, we all of a sudden have 25 million unemployed people in this country that we didn't have a month ago. So labor shortages simply aren't a concern right now. So on our side of the pond, what's going to be happening over the next 3 months is our metro regions are going to start to open up. They're going to be forced to reindustrialize if they want these products. Some states are going to be able to take advantage of that better than others because they either have a better healthcare system or a better testing regime or a better infrastructure or cheaper electricity or a population that's more willing to work in a slightly higher risk environment. Texas. Texas has been a boom state for a while now, but in the environment that we're moving into, Texas has the interface between the Texas Triangle cities and the Gulf Coast, and between the United States and Mexico. So it's got that multi-tiered wage strategy that has been familiar to us. It's a tech center, especially Dallas-Fort Worth. It's an energy sector, especially Houston. And it's a cutting-edge tech operationalization facility in the case of Austin. So it's all in one place in a state that has no income tax. So I expect Texas is going to kind of have outsized performance for the next couple of years. That doesn't mean other places aren't going to be taking advantage of this. That's kind of where I think it's going to happen first. One of the things to keep in mind is that because of the physical and demographic structure of the United States, we will have secondary epidemics from this, but they won't be nationwide. It'll hit Denver, it'll hit Fort Lauderdale, whatever, and you can lock those cities down. Our mass transit system, particularly among our cities, is awful. And right now that's a good thing because it means it limits the capacity of the virus to jump from city to city to city. You don't have that in China. You don't have that in Indonesia. You certainly don't have that in India or France. There, once you get an epidemic, it's going to go national very, very quickly. And that is going to provide Americans with a bit of a leg up in this process. We will in time, evolve in the technological direction that you're pointing out. Absolutely. But it probably isn't going to start out that way. I mean, the geography is so riven in sub-Saharan Africa, it's really hard to draw any sort of conclusions. Nigeria, as you pointed out, is the demographic heavyweight, both in terms of age structure and just size. The biggest problem they're going to be having, however, is they've never really been able to diversify their economy away from crude, and more importantly, their political system is completely based on the divvying up of the crude resources. If you want to go back to like the Biafran War, that was a period where some parts of the country thought that they could deny oil income to other parts of the country. And so the Biafrans tried to leave. We had a civil war as a result. And now we have a rotating presidential system where every few years, a different region of the country has the president, a different region of the country has the vice president. And as long as nobody dies out of order, the oil flows and everybody is happily subsidized. Oil's going to zero. So the entire political compromise system that has kept violence in Nigeria to a relatively tolerable level is going away. We think economic restructuring in this country is difficult. It is. They're going to have to deal with a ground-up overhaul of their political system this year. I don't see how they do that in a peaceful manner. Yeah, that's a really messy question. In a place like Nigeria, it could go either way. The problem there is that most of their politics are ethnic and regional based, and so it doesn't require a huge technological distribution system in order to get these people riled up. It's not that it's built into their nature. I don't mean anything racist like that. It's just that there are very clear dividing lines in Nigeria, and some of the big successes they've had in the last 40 years is to think of Nigeria as a country and to think of themselves as Nigerians rather than Igbo or some other Fulani group. I'm concerned that is going to spin apart once the oil stops flowing. But remember, technology works both ways here. If there's anything that the Chinese and the Russians and the Egyptians have shown us in the last 10 years is you can use it just as easy to clamp down. So you're familiar with the Twitter revolution in Egypt, I'm sure. If you remember the first phase of that, the military decided they did not like the Mubarak clan. So they were hands-off versus the protesters, and the protesters used the internet and Twitter and cell phones to organize and ultimately overthrow the Mubarak regime. But then the military decided it didn't like the replacement government that was elected. So what they did is they went and they shut down Twitter. And they were able to do their crackdown. They arrested the entire government. And I mean, there was that one horrific trial where they condemned 600 people to death. And now it's basically a one-party state with complete information lockdown. Well, the Russians came in and was like, hey, that was really cool what you did that. How did you do that? And so the Egyptian generals showed the Russians, well, we have these two cables that come into the country, and that's the entire internet connection to the outside world. We just cut them. So the Russians went and they built kill switches on all the places where the cables came into Russia so they could do the same thing whenever they want. And now they've got monitoring centers at those cables. So if they see message traffic that they don't like, they can go and hunt down the individual people responsible. The Chinese, of course, have amped that up to the next degree, where now they've even forced cooperation with companies like Google so that if they see messages they don't like, they're automatically tagged by algorithms and sent to the Chinese security services, complete with the physical location for where the message was sent from. So a team can just go arrest the person.